Developments in the last few years have placed journalism under fire. A range of factors are transforming the communications landscape, raising questions about the quality, impact and credibility of journalism. Professor Herman Wasserman from UCT Center for Film and Media Studies will embark on an international study on the information disorder in the Global South. He joins us now. Good evening, Professor Wasserman. It's a pleasure to have you on. These are all very important issues and questions that you are asking about the state of journalism. Before we get into that, though, why the Global South? Disinformation is an international phenomenon.
Indeed, yes, it is an international phenomenon. But we see that most of the research thus far have concentrated on the global north, what is happening in North America and UK and Europe. And there has not been that much attention paid to the global south. So that's the one reason. And the other reason is that there are other similarities between countries in the global south, such as huge socioeconomic inequalities, fragile democracy, pressure on media freedom. So there are many other factors that also lead us to think about how can we comparatively view these countries and the effect that disinformation has on them.
So what exactly are you going to be investigating?
Well, we are looking mostly at the actors and the organizations that fight disinformation, that work in this space. And this ranges from fact checkers to people intervening in the policy space, to people doing media literacy. So what we're trying to do is map these organizations and the networks in the Global South that work in this anti-disinformation space. So it's better to see what are the key trends and themes, and also what are the needs of these organizations, so that hopefully down the line we can build collaborations between them, and we can look at where are the needs that need further support and further amplification.
Disinformation in of itself has created huge questions, in particular around who are the creators of this content, and what are the different agendas that could well be at play. Will you be looking at that at all?
I think this will come into play when we speak to our teams in these regions. It's a big collaborative and participatory project, so we'll be listening to what our teams in these various regions in Latin America and Asia and the MENA region and in Africa tell us about what the major threats are in their regions, who the major players are. So we'll be looking at that, and we'll be listening carefully to see what are the issues emerging from these different regions.
Are there specific topics that you're going to be narrowing down this research around? Because, misinformation and disinformation consists around various topics, and the more clear ones that we can talk about, such as, the different conspiracies and narratives around COVID-19 that have affected the whole world. But there are also those that are a lot more localized to specific countries and areas.
Yes, indeed. It is a big area, and it's a huge spectrum as well of different types of mis and disinformation. Some of it is orchestrated by big players. We've seen in South Africa, the Bell Pottinger scandal was probably one of the most egregious examples of this, where this was orchestrated. But sometimes it also happens more informally, people sharing conspiracy theories on social media. So there is a big range. And I think one of the things that we'll be looking at is also to see what are the major problems in the regions. In one region, something like conspiracy theories might be more problematic. In another, interference in elections might pose a specific problem. So again, this will be informed by the different contexts, and we'll be certainly trying to incorporate as many of these different dimensions of misinformation as possible.
And in terms of the distinctions that you're going to be making, because already in this interview we're talking about mis and disinformation, there's also propaganda and all sorts of other definitions that I would imagine you would also be looking. Are you going to be making those distinctions in your research?
Yes, these distinctions aren't watertight, of course, but we can distinguish between disinformation, which is usually seen as an intentional spreading of false information, misinformation, which is false but not always intentionally spread, so not necessarily spread by actors that want to interfere in elections, for instance. It can be what people share on social media. And then malinformation is just poor information that might contain some truth, but it's also decontextualized or not presented properly. So these are sort of three different categories. And we're trying to get away from the notion of fake news because firstly, there's a contradiction in the term fake news. If something is news, it by definition cannot be fake if it's real news, but also because fake news has been weaponized by political players to undermine the legitimacy of mainstream media. So misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation are three categories, but there is some overlap. And as you said, propaganda also fits in there. It's usually seen in terms of disinformation by states. So yes, it's a broad spectrum.
How long do you think it's going to take you?
Well, we have 1 year in terms of this specific project to do the initial mapping. And so we're already underway. We're already speaking to our partners in these various regions. So the project's already kicked off, and we have until about December to do this mapping and come up with an overview report. And after that, we'll certainly also communicate this publicly, the findings of this study in a conference or a workshop. And then after that, we'll look at how to build on this. How can we use research and also support by civil society organizations, for instance, and funders to try and support these organizations that have emerged from the study that seem to be the ones that need further support and further development.
I imagine one of the other things that you'll be trying to uncover is why exactly it is that disinformation spreads so much quicker than the real facts of a story.
Yes, because often disinformation is something that gets, especially we can see this in the pandemic, for instance. People are anxious, people are uncertain, so they tend to grasp at straws. And if there's something that's an easy and a simple explanation that might give you some comfort or some explanation, you tend to go for that. And you might even share that. Sometimes people share this explanations of these conspiracies, etc., with friends in sort of a misplaced sense of social responsibility. They will want to warn others, they want to explain things to others. But the real facts are often much more complicated, and the real news stories are often complex. And we can see this around issues like the vaccine, and the whole pandemic has been a very complex and involving story. So, people don't always have the patience or don't always have the willingness to engage with these complexities. And then disinformation then tries to elicit an emotional response, and people tend to latch onto that. So that's one of the reasons why false information often is more appealing than the real complex, hard, long work of proper journalism.
Professor Herman Wasserman from the UCT Center for Film and Media Studies, thanks for your time on News at Prime. Certainly a very important research project.